All right, everyone, it's time to talk about Ebola in the Congo. They were getting a handle on cases, but now around Beni, which is one of the earliest regions that was associated with the outbreak. It's a city of, if I remember correctly, about 500,000 people. Or maybe that's Butembo and Beni's the one of 250,000. It's one or the other, I can't remember. They've snuffed out the infections in certain areas, but you've still got a lot of rebel activity in some of these more minor metropolitan areas. Unfortunately, what's happened is that a whole bunch of people are dying, and a lot of them are aid workers. Because those people have to go in and they have to, under guard usually with soldiers around them do their business. They're sitting ducks, unfortunately. What's happened is that the rebels realize this and realize that a lot of that equipment is worth a lot of money, and this is spreading Ebola around. Ebola has now resurged. You've got more new cases now than a month ago. It's upticked since then, since the lull there. They thought they were going to be able to end it before winter. Obviously, it's not the case, insofar as you have winter, of course, in that climate. Again, this is a ticking time bomb, because every time you have a new infection, you have the possibility of it mutating. This happened before. I'm going to reiterate this every time I touch upon disease, anything related to epidemics, especially Ebola. Ebola has a readiness to mutate. We know that already. We know this because it did this in the West African outbreak several years ago. Ebola had mutated, which is why it began infecting more people. It wasn't some uniqueness about the region in which it broke out. It wasn't some uniqueness. It wasn't because of burial customs involving touching the dead bodies. It didn't help, but it wasn't itself responsible for the initial spread. It was because whoever ate the first piece of bushmeat got a version of Ebola that was mutated. It was more able to survive outside of the human or other host body, outside of the host organism, for a longer period. It was more durable. This allowed it to spread a little bit faster. Ebola is normally not that great at spreading. Most Ebola cases, other than locally, they're the result of the consumption of something infected. They eat chimp meat or bat meat especially. They get Ebola, they're dying, they infect their family, maybe their close friends, and usually at that point, help comes in and they snuff it out fairly quickly. But if the Ebola is more able to residually be on a surface or transmit from person to person by droplets more easily, that becomes a little bit more difficult. Since it already mutated before, causing 20,000 people to die, that could happen at any given time here. Every new case is a ticking time bomb. It's not being taken seriously enough. It could result in millions or perhaps billions of deaths. The Spanish flu is not a monolithic thing in modern times. Well, semi-modern, of course. It was more than 100 years ago at this point. World War I, you've got dirty and high concentration of people in one area, trench warfare, World War I. This helped the disease to circulate among the troops and mutate faster. Is this not fundamentally similar to the atmosphere you've got in certain urban parts of Africa today? You don't have any sanitation. You have very little access to clean water or even more than the most basic medicine. Medicine is basically once a year you go to a dude who sticks a stethoscope on you, looks in your ears and judges you healthy and sends you on your way with a little bit of tonic water and a couple of mosquito nets. And that's basically it. That's what you've got in most parts of Africa still to this day. There's development happening. There are some cities in Africa that have certainly a lot more roads than they did 20 years ago. They've also got many times the population and not enough wealth to go around in the terms of the distribution of basic health necessities. It is a ticking time bomb. When people say, well, it doesn't matter, haha, it's over there in the third world, you'd love to believe that it would stay there. Just as I'm sure that plenty of civilians around the world before the Spanish flu created a whole lost generation say, oh yeah, people in trenches get sick. People in trenches, they don't get enough food, they're getting shot at, maybe they're wounded anyway, they're in shitty conditions, up to their knees in mud. Of course they're going to get trench rot and stuff. But we're here, we've got sewage systems, and we're so clean, and we take a bath every week, whether we need to or not. Didn't help, you did it. Now, it killed a lot of fucking children and little old ladies in the United States and elsewhere when it broke out now, didn't it? Do you think Ebola will spare you because you've got a sewage line? Yeah, it helps. There's less rodents around, but there's plenty of people. There are plenty of densely populated cities in the US and Europe. If you get some super Ebola coming to them, you might not survive. A lot more death rate than Spanish flu, by the way. When panic like that happens, the normal medical apparatus breaks down anyway. Western or Eastern country, it makes no difference. It's always funny when people think that disease can't jump borders. Like, oh, well, it's one thing over the dude. We can't even keep people who are healthy from coming across our borders in the Western world. What the fuck are you talking about? Somebody with Ebola right now could fly into Mexico and walk across the U.S. border and cause a mini epidemic in Houston tomorrow. You do realize this, right? There are Congolese illegal aliens that have been picked up at the southern border from where the Ebola is actually spreading. Now, of course, is it likely that that's going to happen? No. Takes them a week to make the transit. Of course, they'd probably be symptomatic. They'd be too sick to walk across the border. They wouldn't even be able to crawl at that point. But the principle is still there. It can happen. We need to understand, number one, that it can. Number two, that if nothing is done, eventually it does. It's happened before. It will happen again. People are so blind to the danger of disease. Oh, I worry way more about the possibility of a pandemic killing a whole shit ton of people than nuclear war. Nuclear war might have a higher overall death toll and take a lot longer to recover from it, maybe, but it's less likely, all things considered. We're overdue for a major world pandemic. We've been staving it off because of vaccination, sanitation, the fact that most people, at least in many parts of the world, have access to basic health care, sometimes even more than that, and also nutrition, of course. A person who's properly nourished tends to have a better immune system. They tend to be better at fending off basic diseases. There's a reason why TB isn't a problem in the United States. You have plenty of people with tuberculosis. Most of them have no symptoms. Tuberculosis can't spread in their body. Their immune system keeps suppressing it, and eventually it goes away. Sometimes if they suddenly get sick from something else, it can rise up and kill them, but for the most part, it doesn't. You've got this problem all throughout the world. Africa, nowhere more than in parts of Central and West Africa, where the population is exploding with growth. The highest growth rate of population, I think, anywhere other than in a few parts of Southern Asia, where you also have tropical disease, and not enough is being done. We need to massively upscale deployment of squads to go in there and at least build basic sanitation situations, sewage lines and things like that. Keep the rodent population down, keep the certain types of insect population down, make sure people understand even something as basic as having a little extra food and washing your hands can prevent an epidemic from occurring in the first place that you then have to deploy additional resources to fight. This is one of the few things on which I think I'm more globalistic than nationalistic. Disease is everyone's problem because of the movement of people. And the idea that you're not going to have any world trade or travel, of course, is never going to happen. Even then, if there's a land border, it doesn't matter if you do. We have to keep that in mind. So yeah, new cases of Ebola. It's ticking back up again. And it's everyone's problem. And unfortunately, the world community is really good at talking a big game. Oh, we need to save these poor children in Africa. They do fucking nothing until thousands of people are dropping like flies. Hindsight's 20/20 for them. That's about all. Peace out.